Leila pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the bedroom window, watching the sky weep with unrelenting rain. The droplets pattered against the pane, forming rivulets that cascaded downward like tiny rivers on a clear canvas. She found the sound both soothing and haunting, a reflection of the tears she felt unable to shed. Her gaze drifted over to the mirror across the room, catching her own reflection, a woman in her late 20s, slight of figure, hair pulled back in a loose braid, eyes filled with a subtle ache she tried so hard to hide. Behind her, the door clicked open, revealing her husband, Jamal. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a confidence that once seemed attractive from a distance. Now, that same confidence had morphed into indifference. He walked into the room without sparing Leila more than a cursory glance, brushing raindrops off his expensive coat. The silence between them had become routine, like a perpetual state of dusk that never gave way to dawn. "Welcome back," Leila said softly, her voice trembling with hope for even the smallest acknowledgement. Jamal looked at her with cold eyes. "Is dinner ready?" he asked, his tone devoid of warmth. "It's in the oven," she replied. "I kept it warm." He shrugged as if her efforts meant nothing. Sliding his shoes off, he stepped onto the plush rug. Leila watched him, waiting for any sign of affection, a kind word, a pat on the shoulder, a quick smile. Instead, he glanced around as though he was alone. Her heart sank, and she returned her gaze to the window. The only comfort she derived in that moment was the steady rhythm of the rainfall outside. She recalled how this marriage had come to be, a rushed ceremony devoid of genuine celebration, orchestrated by relatives who believed Jamal was doing her a kindness. After all, a girl with no wealth, no reputable family connections, what man would marry her if not out of pity? Leila forced a tight smile, remembering the words she'd overheard at their wedding reception from a distant aunt, better to be married than remain an old maid. Even if it's not love, at least it's something. Now, she felt the echo of those words in every corner of this lifeless house. "Don't just stand there," Jamal grumbled, "go get me a towel." "I'm soaked." She hesitated. "Right. Of course." As she walked away to fetch the towel, her footsteps seemed too loud on the hardwood floor, reminding her that she existed in this house as an afterthought. And somewhere in her heart, a seed of desperation took root, silently yearning for a day when she would no longer be invisible. The following weekend, the aroma of catered delicacies filled the grand living room. Jamal was hosting one of his business gatherings, a monthly affair to impress investors, colleagues, and anyone who could further his standing in society. Leila, dressed in a modest ivory dress, hovered near the kitchen door, invisible to the swirling crowd of expensive suits and glittering gowns. Waiters glided through the space with trays of canapés and champagne. From behind the doorframe, Leila spotted Jamal's unmistakable form at the center of a laughter-filled circle. Standing beside him was Sasha, tall, elegant, and stunningly confident. She wore a shimmering black cocktail dress, and her laughter tinkled like silver bells in Jamal's ear. Occasionally, Sasha's manicured hand would rest on Jamal's shoulder, and he would lean in with a grin. Anyone watching them could see the electricity in their gaze. Leila's chest tightened at the sight. She felt a sting of envy and shame swirl in her gut, especially when a woman in the group asked, "Jamal, where's your wife tonight?" His dismissive tone cut Leila more than she cared to admit. "Oh, Leila? She's not interested in these events. She's just around." A polite chuckle came from the crowd, but she detected a flicker of pity in some guests. Leila's cheeks burned. She took a step back, swallowing the bitter taste of neglect. On more than one occasion, Jamal had introduced Sasha as a close friend, even going so far as to call her his partner in a new venture. Yet never once did he place the same value on Leila's presence. Suddenly, she felt a light tap on her shoulder. Turning, she saw a waiter offering her a glass of water. "Ma'am," he said kindly, "you look like you might need this." She smiled weakly, taking the glass. "Thank you." As she sipped, she heard Jamal's laughter ringing from the living room. A sharper voice broke through the chatter, Sasha's. Honestly, I can't imagine why someone like you would be burdened with a wife who doesn't bring anything to the table, Sasha remarked, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. The cruelty of it stung like a slap. Leila bit her lip, scanning the crowd's reaction. Most people wore awkward expressions, but no one protested. Sasha's boldness was apparently well known, and no one dared challenge her. Unable to remain in the shadows of that bright, mocking crowd any longer, Leila escaped up the winding staircase to the second-floor corridor. She found solace in the quietness of the hallway. There, she leaned against the wall and slid down until she was seated on the floor. Her heart pounded with a mixture of anger, shame, and heartbreak. She felt powerless, like a piece of furniture in Jamal's world, noticed only for practical use, then forgotten. Minutes later, she heard footsteps. Jamal came up the stairs, presumably looking for her. For a fleeting moment, Leila allowed herself the hope that he had come to check on her out of genuine concern. "There you are," he said, annoyance clear in his voice. "You disappeared. Look, some of the guests might still want to meet you, even if I don't see why." Leila's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. "I'm not feeling well," she managed. He sighed dramatically. "Well, just try not to ruin this night, okay? Go to bed if you have to, but don't make a scene. I have a lot riding on this party." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away. Leila looked down at her hands, noticing her nails dug into her palms so hard they left crescent marks. The night would pass, as it always did, but the deeper pain of being hidden away like an unwanted secret settled firmly in her heart. It was well past midnight when the clink of keys at the front door signaled Jamal's return from dropping off Sasha. Leila lay in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, eyes wide open. She had heard them talking downstairs, the easy banter, Sasha's throaty laugh, Jamal's matching amusement. She stilled herself, pretending to sleep, hoping to avoid another tense exchange. Through the silence of the house, she caught soft footsteps approaching the bedroom. The door creaked open just enough for Jamal to peer inside. Convinced she was asleep, he quietly stepped out again, leaving the door ajar. Leila exhaled, her heart drumming against her ribs. She pondered the question that gnawed at her mind every day: why did he marry her at all if he had no intention of caring for her? The answer was brutally simple: pity. Everyone said it, he has a good heart. He took in a girl with no bright future. But that so-called good heart seemed to be as distant as the moon. Pressing her palms against her closed eyes, she tried to ward off the despair that threatened to swallow her. It was then that she heard muffled voices from the hallway. Curiosity drove her to silently slip out of bed, tiptoeing toward the bedroom door. From a crack in the doorway, she saw Jamal standing at the top of the stairs, phone in hand. His expression was tense. He was talking to Sasha. "I promise," Jamal whispered, "once I get my finances fully stable, I'll figure out a way to get rid of her." His voice was cold, calculated. "I can't just kick her out without a plan. Too many people would ask questions." Leila's breath caught in her throat. Get rid of her? The primal fear that coursed through her veins nearly made her sway on her feet. She had always known their marriage lacked love, but hearing him discuss discarding her like an inconvenient piece of trash seared a new brand of pain into her consciousness. Jamal paced quietly, continuing, "We'll have our own life soon, Sasha. You'll see. She's just a temporary obstacle." In that moment, Leila slid back into the shadows, returning to the bed in silent horror. Her heart pounded like a war drum. She felt a surge of defiance mingle with her panic. She wouldn't let herself remain a pitiful obstacle. She was going to find a way out, or at least find a lifeline to pull her from this sinking ship of a marriage. Sleep didn't come easily. She stayed awake until dawn, formulating silent vows to change her fate. The next morning arrived with a cool, pale sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows. Leila stood by the sink, rinsing dishes, while Jamal tapped away on his phone, ignoring her. Suddenly, the doorbell's sharp ring sliced through the quiet. Jamal frowned, heading to open it, while Leila dried her hands and followed after him. A somber man in a black suit stood at the threshold, holding a brown envelope. "I'm looking for Mrs. Leila Rahman," he announced, scanning a document in his hands. Leila stepped forward, shooting Jamal a puzzled glance. "That's me. I'm terribly sorry to inform you that your grandmother, Mrs. Mariam Ali, has passed away." The man's voice was respectful, but direct. He held out the envelope. "This letter is from her lawyer." Leila's stomach lurched in surprise. She hadn't seen her grandmother since she was a young girl. Her parents had distanced themselves from the family for reasons never fully explained. All she knew was that the Alice were once extremely wealthy, but that fortune was lost or left behind when her parents chose a humbler life. She took the envelope with unsteady hands. I didn't even know she was still alive." The man gave her a sad smile. "My condolences. Inside, you will find details regarding her final will and testament." Jamal hovered near them, his posture instantly alert, as though the mere mention of an inheritance piqued his interest. Once the man left, Leila carefully slid the envelope's contents out onto the kitchen table. The first paragraph confirmed her grandmother's passing, and the next lines caused her heart to skip a beat. Her grandmother had left her a massive inheritance, including a stake in the family's long-dormant business ventures. But there was one condition: Leila must take active control of the company within 6 months or risk losing everything to other distant relatives. Jamal's eyes gleamed. He took a step closer, leaning over her shoulder to read. "An inheritance? A company?" He chuckled, sounding almost impressed. "I had no idea you came from money." Leila felt a surge of conflicting emotions: sadness over her grandmother's death, confusion about her family's wealth, and a bizarre kind of hope that this letter could be her ticket out of the stifling existence she shared with Jamal. She stepped away from him, hugging the envelope to her chest. I need time to process this," she whispered, her voice tinged with shock. Jamal nodded, but not out of compassion. She could sense the wheels turning in his mind. The same man who had spoken of getting rid of her now saw an opportunity. "Of course," he said, smoothing the front of his shirt with forced calm. "Take your time." But as Leila stared at the letter, she felt something unexpected spark inside her, a seed of rebellion, a swirl of ambition, and a longing for a life that was truly hers. For the first time in ages, she considered the possibility that her marriage might not be her only destiny. A week later, Leila found herself in the plush, wood-paneled office of a prestigious law firm. Her gaze wandered over the rows of leather-bound books and the large windows overlooking the city skyline. She held her purse tightly on her lap, trying to calm the flutter of nerves in her stomach. A door opened, and a distinguished-looking lawyer stepped in. "Mrs. Rahman, thank you for coming." He gave her a polite bow. "My name is Mr. Siddiqui. I oversaw your grandmother's estate." Leila offered a small smile, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for meeting me. I didn't know she was still involved in any business. My parents never told me much." Mr. Siddiqui nodded. "Your grandmother always hoped you would return to the family. She spoke of you often. She mentioned the estrangement your parents insisted on, but she never gave up on you." He paused, pulling out a folder. "Here are the details of her estate." She owned a large stake in Ali Holdings, a conglomerate that once dominated multiple industries. Much of it became dormant, but the potential is still there. If you choose to accept the will's conditions, you could revive it. Leila's hands shook as she leafed through papers detailing bank accounts, property deeds, and business portfolios. It was overwhelming. "I don't know the first thing about running a business." Mr. Siddiqui gave her a gentle smile. "There are many people who can help. Your grandmother arranged for a team of advisors to guide you. She believed in your potential." At the mention of her grandmother's faith in her, Leila felt an unexpected warmth in her chest. I'm still finding it hard to believe all this is real. I've lived humbly my entire life. Life can change in an instant, Mr. Siddiqui said, closing the folder. You have 6 months to prove active leadership. Otherwise, the inheritance reverts to other extended relatives who have already filed claims. But your grandmother's wishes were explicitly for you to take charge, if you are willing. Leila exhaled, her mind reeling. If she stepped up and claimed this role, would it finally give her the power and freedom she craved? She thought of Jamal's dismissive attitude, his disrespect, and his plans to discard her. Maybe this inheritance was her chance to carve out an identity beyond a pitiful wife. I'll do it, she said, voice soft yet firm. I'll do whatever it takes. Mr. Siddiqui's expression brightened. Wonderful. We have an excellent retired CEO who can mentor you, if you'd like. He's well-versed in reactivating dormant businesses. Leila gave a determined nod. Yes, I want to learn. Show me the way. In her mind, she heard the echoes of Jamal's cold words, telling Sasha he would dispose of her once he had enough resources. Now, she held a trump card, and a secret thrill coursed through her veins. For the first time, fate seemed to hand her the reins of her own life. In the weeks that followed, Leila's routine changed drastically. Where once her days were spent in a lonely house, cooking, cleaning, and gazing out windows, she now rose early, grabbed a neat business outfit, and headed to the Ollie Holdings offices downtown. She met with Mr. Sagar, the retired CEO who had agreed to mentor her. A disciplined man in his 60s, he had a quiet authority about him that made her feel both nervous and inspired. Their first meeting took place in a spacious conference room. Mr. Sagar wore rimless glasses and carried a leather-bound notebook everywhere he went. So, Leila, he began, tell me what you know about the legacy your grandmother left behind. She shifted in her seat, her new pencil skirt feeling foreign yet empowering. Very little, honestly. I know she was wealthy, that she had businesses in real estate, textiles, and some other sectors. But I don't understand the scope. He handed her a thick binder. This is a crash course on Ollie Holdings. For now, you'll need to focus on reactivating at least one core segment. We have a real estate development project that was put on hold a few years ago. If we can revive it, that alone could secure your position. Leila opened the binder. The pages bristled with numbers, project timelines, and industry jargon she didn't yet understand. But rather than feeling intimidated, she felt a surge of excitement. Every new term she learned, every successful meeting she conducted, moved her closer to freedom. Daily, she worked through feasibility studies, learned about market research, and even practiced her speaking skills. Mr. Sagar coached her in negotiation tactics and reminded her repeatedly, confidence is key. If you don't appear confident, no one will trust your leadership. One afternoon, she returned home wearing a crisp blazer, her hair swept back into a polished bun. Jamal was in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV. When he looked up, his eyes flickered with confusion. You look different, he remarked, furrowing his brow. What's with all this business get-up? Leila managed a polite but distant smile. I had meetings today. Meetings for what? She paused. For my new responsibilities. I told you about the inheritance and that I planned to take charge, remember? He scoffed lightly. Yeah, but I thought you were just going to sign some papers, let some professional handle the rest. You're not seriously thinking you can manage a company, are you? She met his gaze head-on, forcing herself not to shrink under his condescending stare. Actually, I do. And I plan to be very involved. Jamal laughed as though it was the funniest thing he had heard all week. Well, good luck with that, sweetheart. His tone dripped with sarcasm as he turned his attention back to the TV. If you run into any trouble, I guess you can come crying to me. Leila swallowed the sting of his dismissive words. She refused to let him see how deeply it hurt. He had no idea how much she was changing, and that ignorance, she realized, gave her a hidden advantage. She headed upstairs without another word, her mind already buzzing with figures and strategies. If she needed further motivation to succeed, Jamal's arrogance provided an endless supply. Months of hard work yielded results faster than anyone predicted. Under Mr. Sagar's guidance, Leila managed to restart a major real estate project in the city's outskirts. She learned to read spreadsheets, interpret market trends, and ask incisive questions. The timid woman who once feared making eye contact was gradually replaced by a budding entrepreneur who walked with her head held high. Soon, the company's main stakeholders insisted on hosting a dinner to celebrate the project's relaunch. Leila decided to invite Jamal along, hoping to assert her newfound authority in front of him. If a part of her wanted to prove something, she didn't deny it. She wanted to show the husband who had neglected her that she was no mere placeholder. On the night of the dinner, Leila emerged from her room in a sleek, navy blue gown. Simple yet elegant, it draped around her figure, accentuating her graceful posture. A delicate gold necklace rested at the hollow of her throat, shimmering under the chandelier light. Jamal, dressed in his usual tailored suit, looked her up and down. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. "You're really going to this dinner?" he asked, eyeing her attire. She offered a level stare. "Yes, of course. It's in my honor, after all." He raised an eyebrow. "Your honor?" "Right." The ride to the upscale hotel was tense, with unspoken thoughts. Jamal fiddled with his phone, sending messages to an unknown recipient. Leila suspected it was Sasha, but she no longer felt the pang of insecurity that used to haunt her. Tonight was about her accomplishments, not about worrying over who was warming Jamal's affections. Upon arrival, they were ushered into a lavish banquet hall filled with round tables draped in white linen. Board members, investors, and high-ranking employees of Ali Holdings milled around, talking in hushed yet excited tones. As Leila and Jamal entered, several heads turned. Murmurs of "she's here" drifted across the room. Mr. Sagar, standing near a table laden with hors d'oeuvres, approached swiftly. "Leila, wonderful to see you." He gave a polite nod to Jamal. "I'm glad you could join us." Jamal nodded, but his eyes traveled over the room with a mix of awe and confusion. He certainly wasn't used to seeing Leila so confidently in the spotlight. One by one, people came to congratulate her on the project's relaunch. A middle-aged businessman shook her hand vigorously. "Mrs. Rahman, your leadership has revived our confidence in the company. We can't thank you enough." Leila felt a warm glow of pride. "Thank you for your support. It's a team effort." As the evening progressed, she mingled with ease, asking about future ventures, discussing expansions, and even receiving heartfelt praise. Jamal lingered in the background, clearly out of his element. For once, he was the one in the shadows, overshadowed by his wife's rising star. Just before the dinner concluded, the event coordinator requested a brief speech from Leila. She stepped up to the microphone, the lights illuminating her poised figure. The hush that fell over the room reminded her of the countless times she had been too afraid to speak. But not tonight. "Good evening, everyone," she began. Her voice carried a confident timbre she scarcely recognized as her own. "I'm honored to be here with all of you to celebrate the revival of what my grandmother built. Ali Holdings means more to me than just business, it's a family legacy I never knew I had until recently. I'm committed to making it thrive, not just for my own gain, but for all of you who've worked tirelessly to keep its spirit alive." The applause was thunderous, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Leila spotted Jamal, arms folded, watching her with a narrowed gaze. His confusion and unease were palpable. And it felt liberating to know that she no longer needed his approval. Not long after that celebratory dinner, Leila continued to pour herself into the company's affairs. Late nights at the office became routine, and she frequently conducted business lunches with potential investors. With each passing week, her transformation became clearer, posture straighter, voice steadier, knowledge deeper. The once timid wife had discovered her power, and it showed. One day, she returned home earlier than usual. The house was unusually quiet, which often meant Jamal was either out or in his study. Walking into the living room, she was startled to see Sasha there, perched elegantly on the couch as though she owned the place. Leila stiffened. "Sasha. I wasn't expecting you." Sasha's ruby-red lips curved into a smirk. She patted the cushion beside her in a mock invitation. "Jamal told me I could wait here. He's getting ready for some business dinner we're attending." Leila swallowed the flare of anger rising in her chest. It was one thing for Sasha to be involved with Jamal, it was another for her to casually lounge in Leila's home, wearing a smug smile. In the past, Leila might have retreated in hurt silence. But now, a new flame of defiance burned within her. "I see," she said coolly. "Well, I hope you're both comfortable." Sasha tossed her perfectly curled hair over one shoulder. "I've noticed you've become quite the busybee these days, always off to some meeting, wearing fancy suits. I guess that inheritance was a big surprise, wasn't it?" Leila nodded, refusing to rise to the bait. "It was, indeed. Surprises can change lives." An almost imperceptible flicker of envy crossed Sasha's features. "I must confess, it's interesting to see how confident you've become. I remember the old Leila, quiet, unassuming, meek." Leila arched an eyebrow. "We all have the capacity to evolve." Sasha laughed lightly, though there was an edge to it. "Well, I'll give you credit for that. Still, Jamal and I have our own future planned out. I just hope you won't complicate things too much." A retort hovered on Leila's lips, but she kept her composure. "Life is full of complications, Sasha. And it often surprises us in ways we never anticipate." At that moment, Jamal entered, straightening his cufflinks. He paused, sensing the tension in the room. "Leila, you're home early." "I had a shorter schedule today," she said simply. Then she addressed both of them, her eyes flicking from Jamal to Sasha. "Enjoy your evening out." Without waiting for a response, she ascended the staircase to her bedroom. Her heartbeat raced with conflicting emotions, anger at Sasha's audacity, determination to hold her ground, and a strange satisfaction that came from seeing Sasha's thinly veiled jealousy. Once again, Leila realized just how pivotal her newfound power was becoming, not only in the business world but within the dynamics of her own household. In the weeks that followed, rumors began circulating in Jamal's social circle that his business was struggling. Deals had fallen through, partners were wary, and even his once stable income streams were drying up. Leila picked up these murmurs from various acquaintances and occasionally from the gossip columns that covered business affairs. During this time, Jamal started to come home earlier. He would roam around the house aimlessly, occasionally peeking into Leila's study as though seeking some form of support. The man who once treated her like a ghost was now hovering near her orbit, as though hoping to absorb some of the energy that came with her growing success. One evening, she was reviewing contracts at the dining table when Jamal walked in, looking more disheveled than usual. He approached her quietly, clearing his throat. "Leila, mind if we talk?" She gestured to a chair across from her. "By all means." He sat down, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "I've been thinking, maybe we should spend more time together. We haven't really been a proper couple. Maybe a vacation would help us reconnect." Leila placed her pen down, carefully measuring her words. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm very busy at the moment. The real estate project is nearing a critical phase, and I can't just leave." A flicker of frustration passed over his face. "It's always business with you these days. Don't you want a break?" She studied him, recalling how he used to belittle her. Now that her status had elevated, he suddenly seemed eager to play the doting husband. "It's not about what I want, Jamal. I have responsibilities now." My grandmother left me a legacy, and I intend to honor it. He pressed his lips into a tight line, obviously displeased at being brushed off. If you need help with finances or anything, you could come to me. I'm still your husband, he tried, an almost desperate edge creeping into his voice. Her eyes narrowed. She knew exactly what he was doing, trying to find a way to benefit from her success. I'll keep that in mind, she said, her tone cool. But so far, I have everything under control. His shoulders slumped in silent defeat. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say more, but he simply stood up and left the room. Leila watched him go, a strange mixture of pity and triumph coursing through her. She remembered how he used to talk to her like an inconvenience, someone unworthy of his attention. Now, she was the one telling him she had no time. And it felt strangely empowering. In the privacy of her home office one afternoon, Leila fielded a phone call from an old college friend who worked in finance. He warned her, Jamal's business is on the brink of collapse. Investors are pulling out, and his debts are piling up. I thought you should know. Leila thanked him for the heads up, ending the call with a growing sense of clarity about Jamal's recent behavior. He was trying to use their marriage as a safety net. The realization left a bitter taste in her mouth, yet it also fueled her resolve to safeguard what she had earned. That evening, she made a decision to confront the situation head-on. She waited until Jamal returned from a fruitless day of chasing investors. In the dimly lit living room, she watched him from the corner of her eye as he loosened his tie and slumped on the couch. I heard your business has been having problems, she said softly, breaking the silence. He flinched, turning to face her. It's just a temporary setback. She arched an eyebrow. Temporary setbacks don't usually involve multiple failed contracts and mounting debt. A faint flush crept into his cheeks. Where'd you hear that? A friend who has contacts in finance, she replied. Why didn't you tell me? We're still married. He laughed, the sound hollow. What good would it do? You never cared about my business before. Leila held her breath for a moment, recalling how many times she had tried to show interest, only to be shut out or belittled. That's not entirely true, she said, keeping her voice steady. But if you need help now, I could consider investing. Under formal terms, of course. Jamal stiffened. Formal terms? You'd sign an agreement, pay interest, treat me like you would any other business partner. He glared, anger blazing in his eyes. I'm your husband, not just anyone. Why should I sign anything to get help from my own wife? Because you never treated me like a partner. Why should I gift you money to bail you out? This is business. A tense silence descended. The man who once bragged about taking her in as a charity case was now the one seeking charity. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Without another word, he stormed off, leaving Leila standing by the faint glow of the living room lamp, her heart hammering. Lines had been drawn. Their marriage, already flimsy, was now on the verge of disintegration. As Jamal's fortunes dwindled, he turned more fervently to Sasha, hoping her socialite connections could secure him a lifeline. Little did he know that Sasha was in the game for her own gain. One night, he discovered she had siphoned funds from a joint account they had set up for a side business venture, leaving him with a gaping financial hole. Leila found him in the study, pacing angrily back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. Damn it, Sasha, you can't just take the money and run. That's fraud. He paused, waiting for her reply, which Leila couldn't hear. But the tension in his expression said enough. He hurled the phone onto the desk. She could see the raw betrayal etched on his face. Turning to her, he sputtered, She stole from me. Sasha! After all I've done for her. Leila folded her arms, biting back the urge to say, Now you know how it feels to be used and discarded. Instead, she measured her words carefully. I'm sorry that happened, she said, her tone neutral. What are you going to do about it? He sank into the desk chair, burying his face in his hands. I don't know. She's gone, probably fled to another country. The account is empty. Despite the resentment she harbored toward him, a small part of her felt pity. She knew the pain of betrayal, even if his was partially self-inflicted. Maybe you should contact the authorities, she suggested, adding, or a lawyer. He nodded, looking like a man adrift at sea. For the first time in their marriage, she felt the shift in power had fully crystallized. He was the one left vulnerable and desperate, while she stood strong and self-assured. In the aftermath of Sasha's betrayal, Jamal grew increasingly desperate. It was as though the foundation of his life had crumbled, and he clung to Leila as the last pillar of stability. Ironically, he had once seen her as a burden, now, he seemed almost dependent on her presence. He lingered around her more often, trying to engage in conversations about her business, praising her intelligence and resilience, praise that would have meant the world to her years ago. One Sunday morning, Leila was in the backyard, watering the small garden she tended when she needed to clear her head. Jamal approached, hands shoved into his pockets. He scanned the vibrant flowers and the few vegetables she was attempting to grow. Remember when we first moved in here? He asked, voice subdued. You wanted to plant those rose bushes, and I told you it was a waste of time. She remembered. Yes, you did. He offered a weak smile. But they turned out beautiful. I guess you showed me. Leila continued watering, acknowledging the compliment with a slight nod. She couldn't forget the sting of that memory, how he had rolled his eyes at her efforts, calling them naive. He cleared his throat. About all that's happened, maybe we can start over. We can be a real couple, go on trips, host events together. She paused, setting down the watering can. Turning, she looked him square in the eye. Jamal, is this truly what you want, or is this about the fact that your business is collapsing and I have the financial means you lack? His face reddened. How can you say that? Because the only time you show any interest in me is when it benefits you. After the wedding, you made it clear you married me out of pity or convenience. You never hid your contempt. Now that your own empire is crumbling, suddenly you want a partnership? He opened his mouth to object, but then closed it, unable to refute her argument. Leila waited for him to find the words, but none came. In the silent tension, she glimpsed the truth behind his eyes. He was driven by greed, by fear, by desperation, not by love. It's too late, Jamal, she said quietly. What's done is done. She left him standing there, the quiet hum of morning birds accompanying her as she returned inside. If there was one thing she had learned from her grandmother's inheritance and the subsequent transformation of her life, it was that she deserved better, better than pity, better than empty promises. Late autumn brought a chill in the air that mirrored the frigid atmosphere between Leila and Jamal. He had retreated into himself, barely leaving his study except to make sporadic phone calls or to rummage for food. Meanwhile, Leila continued to flourish professionally, expanding her grandmother's business ventures and building alliances that would secure her position long-term. One crisp afternoon, she visited her lawyer's office. The conversation was straightforward yet emotionally laden. She wanted to file for divorce. The lawyer, Mr. Siddiqui, seemed understanding, especially after seeing the documentation of her marriage's disintegration. Back home, Leila laid out the divorce papers on the dining table, waiting for Jamal to return. When he finally walked in, hair disheveled, shirt untucked, she took a steadying breath. We need to talk, she said, gesturing for him to sit. Once he did, she slid the papers across the table. I'm filing for divorce. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, a myriad of emotions flashed across his features, anger, disbelief, perhaps even sorrow. Why? He asked, voice trembling. She inhaled, trying to keep her composure. Because this marriage was never built on love or respect. You saw me as a burden, later as a means to financial security. And I refuse to live like that anymore. He slammed a fist on the table, causing the documents to flutter. You're my wife. You can't just walk away. Leila met his gaze. I can, and I will. You wanted to get rid of me, remember? I'm simply giving you what you wished for. The color drained from his face. I was angry when I said those things. I never. Stop, she interrupted, voice firm. Don't lie to me, or yourself. This is over. She could see him wrestling with a mixture of regret and pride. Eventually, he snatched the papers, flipping through them without comprehension. You'll regret this, he hissed, but the desperation in his eyes made the threat ring hollow. Leila stood up, her hands steady despite the emotional turmoil inside. No. I won't. With that, she turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving Jamal alone with the evidence of their crumbling union. The sense of finality filled her with a strange mix of relief and sadness. Yet, beyond those doors, she sensed a wide-open future she intended to seize. News of the impending divorce spread swiftly among Jamal's social circle. With it, any remaining business ties he had seemed to unravel further. Rumors circulated that he was on the verge of bankruptcy, and whispers of Sasha's theft made him an object of mockery at upscale gatherings where he once strutted with pride. Leila, on the other hand, received messages of support and curiosity. People wanted to know how she had transformed from a shadowy figure at Jamal's parties to a powerful businesswoman and soon-to-be ex-wife of a failing entrepreneur. While she maintained a dignified silence, the tabloids crafted their own sensational narratives. One evening, she met with Mr. Sagar in the new headquarters of Ali Holdings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a bustling cityscape, lights twinkling like scattered stars. He offered her a respectful nod. I heard about the divorce. Are you holding up well? She nodded. As well as can be expected. Honestly, I feel free. He studied her face. I remember the day you first walked in here, so unsure of yourself. Look at you now. She allowed a small smile. Thank you for helping me reach this point. My grandmother must have been extraordinary to leave so many opportunities behind. She was indeed. And she saw something in you, enough to believe you could continue her legacy. Leila gazed out the window, feeling an upwelling of gratitude for the grandmother she barely knew and an unshakable resolve to honor that belief. No longer was she just Jamal's wife, she was Leila, CEO, a formidable presence in her own right. Leila's professional circles brought her into contact with countless individuals, among them a man named Tariq, an investor with a gentle manner and kind eyes. Their paths crossed repeatedly at business events, and over time, their casual conversations morphed into deeper discussions of life and aspirations. One afternoon, after a fruitful meeting, Tariq asked if she'd like to join him for coffee. They chose a cozy cafe near the company building, the aroma of fresh pastries and the hum of low conversations setting a warm atmosphere. As they settled at a small table, Tariq ventured, I've seen how much you've grown in just a few months. It's impressive, Leila. You carry yourself like someone who knows exactly where she's going. She chuckled softly. I wish that were entirely true. I'm still navigating a lot, business challenges, personal changes. But I feel more alive now than ever. He leaned forward, genuine curiosity lighting his features. What drove you to take charge so decisively? She paused, thinking of her grandmother's will, of Jamal's cruelty, and the moment she heard him talk about discarding her. I guess you could say, necessity. When life offers you a chance to break free from a prison of low self-worth and disrespect, you either seize it or remain trapped. Tariq nodded with understanding. That's admirable. And you did more than just seize it, you excelled. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics, favorite travel destinations, childhood memories, funny anecdotes from the business world. Yet beneath the surface, a mutual warmth blossomed. Leila caught herself smiling in a way she hadn't in years. It felt good, almost surreal, to connect with someone who respected her for who she was, not just for what she could offer. As they parted ways, Tarek placed a gentle hand on her arm. I'd be delighted to continue our conversation sometime outside of boardrooms and contracts. For a moment, she hesitated. Memories of the loveless marriage with Jamal flickered through her mind. But something about Tarek's earnestness kindled hope. Perhaps, when the divorce was settled and she had fully stepped into her new life, she could open her heart to real companionship. A month later, the divorce was finalized. The lawyer handed Leila the official papers, stamped and recorded, symbolizing the end of her legal bond with Jamal. She felt a pang of bittersweet relief. She emerged from the courthouse, the crisp winter air stinging her cheeks. Each breath she exhaled seemed to carry away the remnants of a life she no longer identified with. Jamal, appearing gaunt and weary, stood by the courthouse steps. He watched her with hollow eyes. She approached him, offering a measured nod. "It's done," she said softly. He swallowed, his voice quiet. "What will you do now?" She looked up at the winter sky, then back at him. "I'll keep building my life, my business, everything I was meant to be. I hope you find your path too." A flicker of regret crossed his face. "Leila, if I'd known." She stopped him with a gentle raise of her hand. "It doesn't matter now. Take care of yourself." Without waiting for a response, she walked down the steps, each footfall echoing with a sense of finality. There was no turning back. She was free. In the months that followed, Ollie Holdings soared to new heights. Leila's strategic moves reactivated dormant assets, and she struck lucrative deals that garnered the attention of national media outlets. Soon, she was invited to a primetime television interview to discuss her company's rapid expansion and her personal journey from obscurity to success. On set, she wore a tailored blazer, her hair styled in a sleek updo. Cameras and bright lights surrounded her, but she maintained a poised demeanor. The host, a well-known journalist, introduced her as Leila Ali Rahman, the rising powerhouse of the corporate world. Leila smiled, a blend of humility and pride warming her expression. The interview delved into her backstory. She shared her grandmother's influence, her initial trepidation, and the pivotal role of having the right mentor. While the host probed gently about her personal life, Leila offered measured responses, keeping the focus on her professional journey. Across the city, Jamal sat in a dingy apartment he'd rented after losing the marital home. He stared at the screen, watching his ex-wife radiate confidence and success, fielding questions with a calm assurance he never imagined she could possess. His phone lay silent on the coffee table, no friends called, no messages appeared. A strange mix of emotions burned in his chest, regret, anger, a longing for the security she now embodied. He tried calling her old number out of impulse. It went straight to voicemail. The realization that he was no longer part of her world sank in like a cold, unrelenting tide. Jamal's old associates, once so eager to bask in his social gatherings, now avoided him. The few who remained occasionally reached out, but only to make snide remarks or to glean gossip. At a small cafe near his worn-down apartment, a former friend, Rohan, sat across from him, nursing a cup of coffee with a pitying smirk. "Man, you really messed up," Rohan said, not bothering to sugarcoat his words. "You had a wife who turned out to be a corporate star, and you let her slip away." Jamal toyed with his paper napkin, his appetite lost. "I didn't know she'd become this successful." Rohan shook his head. "Does it matter? She was dedicated. She might have helped you if you'd treated her right. Instead, you flaunted Sasha around like a trophy and disregarded Leila completely." Jamal winced at the blunt truth. Memories swirled, late-night phone calls to Sasha, humiliating Leila at social events, calling her a charity case. Now, he was the one with empty pockets, while Leila soared in the public eye. "If you're just here to gloat, you can leave," Jamal muttered, a bitter edge in his voice. Rohan shrugged. "I came to see if you needed help. But it looks like you're too far gone." Pride still intact, though. As Rohan left, Jamal sat there, staring at the table's chipped surface. He realized that pity now fell on him. He was the charity case, and not a soul was extending a hand in kindness. While Jamal wallowed in regret, Leila's life embraced new joys. Her interactions with Tariq evolved into heartfelt dates, quiet strolls in the park, and candlelit dinners where they discussed business, dreams, and personal histories. He made her laugh with silly anecdotes, comforted her when work stress piled up, and most importantly, respected her autonomy. One evening, after a particularly celebratory dinner honoring Ali Holdings' record profits, Tariq walked Leila to her car. The moon glowed overhead, and a faint breeze rustled the trees lining the street. "I'm incredibly proud of you," he said, gazing into her eyes. "You've come a long way, Leila. And I know you'll achieve even more." She felt a rush of warmth, butterflies fluttering in her stomach. "I couldn't have done half of it without the moral support you gave me these past months." They stood there in a comfortable silence before Tariq finally spoke again, his voice gentle yet resolute. "Would you ever consider getting married again, someday?" Leila's heart skipped a beat. She had avoided thinking too much about a second marriage, cautious from her previous experience. But seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she felt a wave of calm. "Maybe," she said softly, "if it's with the right person, and the relationship is built on genuine respect and love." He smiled, taking her hands in his. "I believe in that wholeheartedly. Whenever you're ready." She left that evening filled with a renewed sense of hope, realizing that not every relationship was destined to be like her first. Perhaps real love and partnership were truly possible. 3 years later, Leila stood on the balcony of her luxurious penthouse, looking out over a skyline adorned with glittering skyscrapers. The city below thrived with possibilities she had once never dared to imagine. She was now Leila Ali, a name recognized in boardrooms and business magazines nationwide. Inside, friends and colleagues gathered for a private celebration, clinking glasses of sparkling juice, Leila's preference, in honor of a new Ali Holdings expansion. Photographers snapped pictures for the press release, capturing her radiant smile. She was dressed in an elegant evening gown, a far cry from the timid wife who once hid away in corners. By her side stood Tariq, her husband of 6 months. Their wedding had been a private but joyous affair, attended by close friends and supportive business partners. No elaborate show, no forced obligations, just a ceremony built on mutual love and respect. The happiness in Leila's eyes was unmistakable. Meanwhile, outside the venue, a solitary figure watched from a distance. Jamal had caught wind of the celebration, though no formal invitation was extended to him. Dressed in a worn coat, he observed the flood of well-wishers entering the building. Through the tall glass windows, he caught glimpses of Leila's laughter, the light in her eyes that he never bothered to kindle. A lump formed in his throat as he realized how severely he had underestimated her potential and how thoroughly he had squandered his chance at happiness. Unable to bear the pang of regret any longer, he turned on his heel and vanished into the bustling city streets, alone with his remorse. The world had moved on without him. The queen he had once belittled now reigned over a kingdom of her own making, with no need, or desire, to look back. Back on the balcony, Leila leaned against the railing, soaking in the cool night air. The city lights shimmered like 1,000 promises fulfilled. Tariq joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her pensive expression. She nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "Just thinking about how far I've come. And feeling grateful for everything." Her phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Sagar, congratulating her once again. She thought of her grandmother, of Mr. Sagar's mentorship, of all the people who believed in her transformation. The memory of Jamal's scornful words no longer caused her any pain. They were relics of a past that had only pushed her to grow stronger. Tariq placed a gentle kiss on her temple. "You deserve every bit of success and happiness, Leila. Don't ever doubt that." She looked over the shimmering city, remembering the timid girl who once stared out a rainy window, longing for a change that seemed impossible. Now, she was living proof that impossible was just another challenge waiting to be conquered. Turning to Tariq, she smiled, her eyes shining with the conviction of a woman who had reclaimed her life. Success is the sweetest revenge, she whispered. And I've never felt more alive. The end.